Friedrich Nietzsche once said that insanity is rare in individuals, but in groups, parties, nations, and epochs, it is the rule. Nowhere do I think that this is more accurate than with Marvel's Disney Plus shows. They've typically been on a downward slope since WandaVision decided to condone the mind enslavement of an entire town, carrying on to Falcon and Winter Soldier's painfully pedestrian treatise on racism, followed by Loki's destruction of its titular character. The rest of the show followed the same vein of painfully awkward dialogue, terrible CGI, and enough ideological messaging to make every DEI board sing with joy. And I have to applaud Marvel, really, on taking the multitude of characters in their pantheon and expanding their stories from characters that no one knows about and making them something to care about, into characters that no one has heard of and that no one cares about. We have reached that point with Marvel's newest Disney Plus show, Echo, featuring a side character that was barely 15% of another Disney Plus show that was released 2 years ago. Between Kate Bishop and Clint Barton running around New York City and shooting their arrows around, the reemergence of Yelena Belova, Echo was just sort of there. She was a female villain who, like every other female villain, has been bland, boring, and far too angry to make herself likable at all. There have been a million female villains throughout the history of cinema, women who have been well-written, even likable in their villainy, iconic when looked back on, who have had Halloween costumes for decades, whose makeup has been done time and time again, and whose lines of dialogue have been quoted as timeless, even though it was quite obvious that they should never be emulated. And yet somehow, over the years, female villains have gone from just that to anti-heroes, gray, stoic, misunderstood, pitiable creatures who have only become villains because the so-called hero has done something to them in their past that was so bad that they were set on this path without their consent. Their willingness to be directly complicit in hurting others is a result of the wrongdoing that has been first done to them. So they have been set on this path of villainy, not of their own autonomy, and their villainous acts are really the hero's fault entirely. I can't even begin to describe the disgust that this fills me with, because what characters and stories like this really say is that consent is the highest form of moral good, and in the villain being done this type of wrong by the hero has taken away their right to consent to this life of villainy. The villain did not consent to be done this wrong, and so in its removal, they are completely justified in everything that they do from here on out because the hero began it all with the first act against them. We've seen it with Maleficent, we've seen it with Darwin from the Marvels, we've seen it with She-Hulk, we've seen it with Reva, we've seen it with Mulan, we've seen it with Helena Shaw, and many, many more. And Echo is just the latest in a long line of female villains who are the way that they are because the hero of the show has wronged them in some way. And so their entire arc is based on nothing more than revenge. I like a good revenge story as much as the next girl, but there are only certain times when it works. Take Gladiator, for instance. The main character's wife and child are brutally murdered by Joaquin Phoenix's Commodus due to the man's jealousy of Maximus' character, his envy that the general had the love of his father and his sister, and his popularity amongst Rome's soldiers. Maximus had something that Commodus wanted, and so he took it with relish and without remorse. He utterly decimated the hero because he was an evil, evil person who was both narcissistic and power-hungry. The movie made no excuses for just how awful he was, and all of his sins were the result of his own actions and had nothing to do with any type of wrongdoing done to him by Maximus. The writers understood that, the directors and producers understood that, and the audience understood that. There was no confusion between direction to absorption by the masses about who was really in the wrong. And over 20 years later, Gladiator is still regarded as an iconic film. And in part, that is because of the moral character of Maximus and the immoral character of Commodus are unmistakable. And in the end, Maximus got his revenge on the man who had done him such wrong for evil's sake, even though it cost him his life. He threw himself wholeheartedly into the notion of revenge, but it was for what he deemed to be a righteous cause, peace for the torment of his soul, and justice for his wife and child who were innocent and who had been done such violence. These are the types of revenge stories that are done right and handled impeccably. The hero has been wronged by the villain in an egregious way, and so the only way to correct this moral imbalance is to seek revenge from the one who caused it. We regard heroes as heroes because they do the right things, and villains as villains because they do evil things, not because they are put upon by the world or have had their actions justified by some type of revenge story that is as shallow as the writers themselves. But unfortunately, we live in clown world now, where every villain has a sob story and is no longer simply evil for evil's sake. Every villain has been dealt a bad hand by the world, so acting out in anger and rage is not only justified, but encouraged. And every hero has a gray past and skeletons in their closet because no one can simply be good anymore. Everyone has to be on the same demoralizing, average level, ready to slip through the cracks into madness, only because circumstances or someone else pushed them or dropped them there. And this is the case study of Echo. Her sob story and villain justification is further corroborated with Kingpin's voiceover, telling her that because she has all this rage inside of her, that they are exactly the same. There's a certain irony in this, as Kingpin is one of the more iconic villains in live-action Marvel due to his, let's just say, violent tendencies and utter ruthlessness. Most people are generally terrified of him, and with good reason. So for him to compare Maya to himself really is the biggest indicator that she is not a hero worth emulating. Not even an anti-hero, really. She's just someone who Disney Marvel want you to like because she's female and diverse and disabled and every other checkbox that modern writers seem to think makes up a good story these days. And that is essentially the entirety of the trailer. The only defining personality characteristic about Maya is her anger, apparently. There is nothing else about her that is remotely interesting, and she spends most of her days angry due to the death of her father and his gang, angry at her uncle Kingpin for his part in it, angry, angry, angry all the time. And this is another reason to not care a single bit about this character. Because even though anger can be described as a drug, the more you are around it, the more exhausting it becomes. And that is how I feel about Echo and various other female characters who fall under this same paradigm. They are exhausting to watch. Their anger makes them impossible to like and prompts a sort of apathy because there is nothing else about them to relate to. When a single emotion is the only thing that defines a character, there is nothing else to care about, and they cease to be their own person, but rather a conduit for the emotions and desires of the writer, a way to work out their own frustrations. And the fact that this is happening in front of audiences kind of makes me uneasy. Working out your frustrations can be accomplished through journaling or exercise or therapy, and clearly everyone who wrote this show needs some or all of the above. Another reason that I think this show is going to tank is due to Disney pulling the Netflix model and releasing all of the episodes to this show in one go, as opposed to drawing them out like they have done in the past. Maybe that's because they have finally gotten some self-awareness and realized that making a character based on rage is not a good narrative strategy. Or else, they just looked at the general show and decided that nothing about it was good, and that it was best to release it all and get it over with, sort of like ripping off a band-aid. Whatever their reason for releasing the show now, it's still telling that not even the producers seem to think that this show will be that good. Isn't that one of the reasons that Daredevil Born Again was canned? I don't want to be presumptuous, but it does feel like we have entered a phase where the Marvel foundations are shaking, and characters we didn't know about are coming out of the woodwork in a desperate attempt to make us like them by giving them motivations and racially diverse tendencies. Echo was not meant to have her own show. She was not meant to be anything beyond a generic villain in Hawkeye, and if they really wanted her to be a leading lady, they should have given her motivations and emotions beyond anger and revenge, and apparently changed her skill set to pay homage to her diverse background for diversity's sake and nothing else. Not only does this signal to audiences that nothing more is needed for telling a good story, but that characters should be all about their emotions and diverse characteristics, and nothing else. And that is an appalling and shallow way to write. No character should ever be so unnuanced that anger is all that they feel, and no character should ever be written based on a list of diversity characteristics in order for it to be a good story. I feel like I'm beating my head against the wall repeating myself as often as this, but no one is getting it, so I kind of feel like I have to. But maybe I am underestimating the collective intelligence of the production team. Maybe it is the wrong idea to attribute such incompetence to them and decide that everything that is written with malicious intent. I don't know if I want to be quite that cynical, because it would only lead to narrative depression for the lack of good storytelling, but I have certainly not been given any reason to think that anything is going to change in the near future. Certainly not with this show. But I guess the one thing that I can look forward to is knowing that at the very least, there won't be the degradation of a beloved male hero figure, because this is just another one of Marvel's diversity projects. We won't see anyone else torn down and humiliated simply for the sake of making Maya look better, and that, at the very least, is a relief. I might be speaking too soon with regards to Kingpin and Daredevil, but fingers crossed. Thanks so much for watching this video, guys. What are your opinions on Echo, and do you think that this show is worth the watch of one episode, let alone 6? Be sure to let me know your thoughts down in the comments section, and let the conversations begin. Until next time, everyone.